Okay, so last week Pastor mentioned that storytelling was one of the themes at the Synod Assembly. Although not a storyteller like one of my grandpas, I do believe each of us has a faith story within us. So I will share a bit of mine and tie it into the general themes in Psalm 30 and Matthew 7:24 through 29. Okay, so I'm a lifelong reader of the comics. It was the first section of the paper I ever read regularly as a child, and I can't imagine subscribing to only a newspaper without comics. That said, I could not appreciate this comic strip when it first started showing up in the News Tribune. So it amuses me to no end that I saw a message in this strip that ran earlier this week. I think as humans, we'd really rather not experience the trials and storms of life. And yet, all of our lives are made up of violent storms, as well as never-ending drizzly gray days, which usually make us appreciate the rainbows, the sunshine, and the calm that follows the storms more than if life was all about full-time rainbows and sunshine. Okay. My faith story begins, as many of yours begins, but may not be as relatable to others. My parents and my aunt and uncle presented me for baptism at Westland Lutheran Church before I was even a month old. Okay, go ahead. My parents, with my older brother and sister, were founding members of the church, and if we ever did miss a Sunday at our church growing up, there was always some sort of worship to replace it. I remember attending church at campgrounds, visiting families and friends' churches, and I distinctly remember if for some reason we stayed home because one of us was sick, we put together our own service at home. Lessons, message, hymns, and all. Next slide. I started Sunday school at the age of 3, and I still remember trying to recite some portion of the 23rd Psalm in that preschool class in order to earn a pin. I'm the one up there that's kind of wrapped like a mummy and extra tall. I learned stories from the Bible at home and in Sunday school and pondered God's role in my life. He seemed a little like Santa Claus to me. He could see everything and knew whether I was naughty or nice. I couldn't wait until I was old enough to sing in the folk choir for elementary-aged kids, where the very groovy Tony Stewart played the guitar, taught us songs, and patiently directed us, spending a whole lot of time and effort on getting us to sing louder. I loved my week at Camp Colton each summer, and campfires with more guitar music were a fun way to end the day. Next slide. It was second nature to be a Christian there at Camp Colton and back home. Most of my friends went to church and many went to my church, and it was easy to be confident in my faith. School activities and sports competitions in our town were never scheduled on Wednesday evenings because that time was reserved for church activities. This was actually in Oregon, not in the Deep South. This confidence in my faith carried through my confirmation at the end of 8th grade. I have vague memories of one of the boys in my confirmation group pulling out at the last minute, and I couldn't understand his doubt. Next slide. High school consisted of youth group activities and the struggle to wake up on the weekends for church. A highlight was a trip to the National Lutheran League Convention in San Antonio, and this shows that our bus broke down frequently on the way to and from Texas. I was definitely getting pulled away from my faith on a more frequent basis, but when our high school Sunday school class spent time studying other religions, I did feel content with the concept of my faith, even if I wasn't living it out consistently. Next slide. My parents and grandparents built a solid foundation for me by giving me the opportunity to hear the words of Jesus and to know of his actions, but most importantly, by modeling actions that were consistent with people who had a relationship with Jesus and a faith in God. As I grew older, I came to view God as a father who loved me through thick and thin, rather than a Santa Claus figure who was putting me on a good or bad list. Matthew 7:24 through 28 says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a crash." Next slide. I would not have received any sort of attendance prize at church for my college years and my 20s, but thankfully I had a solid foundation. At PLU, I remembered stopping by a wingmate's room to get notes from a class I'd missed. Somewhere in the process of chatting, she asked me, "Heidi, do you know Jesus?" Yes, I do know Jesus. And I replied, and I quickly left her room. And after thanking her for the notes, I was actually offended by her question, but she sure made me think about why she asked me that. Were my actions not reflecting the words and actions of Jesus? Next slide. I thought you guys would enjoy this one of Jim. On our first date post-college, Jim fixed me dinner. Smart guy. He cooked and cleaned up, which was quite impressive. But the fact he asked God's blessing on our food in his own words actually made a huge impact on me. I certainly didn't think to pray very often at that age, but because of my Christian foundation, his prayer made me think about how far I'd pulled away from any relationship with God. Next slide. After marriage, we struggled a bit with finding a church home in Arkansas. We visited the Blytheville, Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, but actually felt more at home at the local Presbyterian church. Being included in the communion meal was important to us. With each move, we found a church home in each new state, but didn't become very involved in any of our locations. Next slide. As our kids came along, we made sure they were baptized, and I again felt a deeper connection with God as church once again became a bigger priority in my life. A Mothers of Preschoolers group in New Jersey became an opportunity to build my faith outside a Sunday service. Next slide. Just as in all our lives, there were storms along the way, I would cry out to God for help and eventually get through them and get to experience some calm after the storm, only to move on to the next cycle of weather. The storm that really knocked me off my feet, and for a very long time, was when my brother died quite suddenly, barely after his 40th birthday. I was furious at God, and when I wasn't mad, I was numb. Thankfully, we were in the middle of a move to Puyallup and would soon find a home at Pilgrim. Through my anger and pain, I had a deep conviction I needed to make every attempt I could to know God on a deeper basis and to be surrounded by a church family. I saw what my brother and his family had in their church home in Ketchikan, Alaska, and I felt it was time to grow up and hold up my end of my relationship with God. Psalm 30 is a song of thanksgiving written after David had perhaps come through a terrible illness. It reminds me that after coming through the storms of life and begging for help from God, that we too need to sing our thanks to Him. Sometimes it's even a matter of thanking and praising Him before the storm is completely over, while we are on the edge but can't yet see the sun and the rainbows. Next slide. Amy did give me permission to show this. I have been pondering these thoughts this past week, and thinking God has a sense of humor. I knew I wanted to convey a message of thanksgiving through sharing part of my faith story, and yet I felt tossed around by the latest storm. Amy had a fairly complicating knee surgery on the 16th. I was sure of my ability to see her through the worst of that recovery period. After all, I'd been through a knee surgery and a foot surgery myself. I had helped take care of my parents after knee and hip replacements. Just 2 months before, we'd seen Nick through double jaw surgery. I had it down. I fully understood the family tendency to get nauseated from pain meds. I pre-made 8 homemade gel ice packs for rotation. I even printed out multiple copies of a favorite medication log from the internet. Surgery went well. The first several days went well, and then Amy seemed to be sliding backwards. Her knee was relatively fine, and we were able to back off all strong medication, but she felt terrible. I could not understand it, and nothing seemed to make her feel much better. So there I was, starting to write this message of thanksgiving following the storms of life, and I was right in the middle of my own storm of worry and stress. I kept thinking, okay, God, I'm super grateful her knee surgery went well. Thank you for that. But please make her feel better and help me know how to help her. I was thinking the thankful words, but maybe not feeling them because I felt I was still being tossed about by the storm. I'm happy to report on the week anniversary of her surgery, she finally started on an upswing. And I can see the rainbow following the storm, and she's actually here today. It will be a long recovery, but the worst of it should be over. We have much to be thankful for, including many incredible medical professionals, supportive family and friends, and of course a young, healthy, hardworking, and determined daughter. So, thank you, God, for being with us always in life, through storms, through gray drizzle, through clear blue skies and bright sunshine. Thank you for helping my parents establish a strong foundation in my Christian life, and thank you for our Pilgrim family.